The dress arrived on a Friday afternoon, wrapped in ivory tissue paper and delivered by a woman who didn't make eye contact when she handed it to me. I didn't order it. There was no card, no explanation, just a gown, floor-length, champagne silk, with delicate beading along the neckline that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. My roommate Danny stood in the doorway of my apartment and said, "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever seen or the beginning of a horror movie." I didn't laugh, because I had a feeling I knew who sent it. My name is Faye, and 6 weeks before that package arrived, I signed a contract I didn't fully read. That's the part people always want to judge. I understand why. I'm a paralegal. I work with contracts every day. I know better than most people what happens when you skip the fine print. But when your father calls you from a casino floor in Atlantic City at 2 a.m. telling you he owes money to people who aren't the kind to send collection notices, when he says your name in that voice, the one he used when you were 8 and he had to tell you your mother wasn't coming home, you stop being a professional and you become a daughter again. My father, Hugh, is not a bad man. That's the thing nobody tells you about people who make devastating choices. Most of them aren't villains. They're just people who found something that made them feel okay for a little while, and then couldn't stop. Hugh Callister had been gambling since I was in high school. Small stuff at first. Scratch tickets. Fantasy football. Then the casinos found him, and the casinos are very good at their job. The debt he called me about was $180,000. I sat down on my kitchen floor when he said the number. Just sat down, right there between the refrigerator and the island, because my legs stopped working. "Who?" I managed. He said the name. Mercer Holdings. I'd heard of it. Everyone in Philadelphia had heard of it, the way you've heard of weather systems that level entire towns. Mercer Holdings was a private equity firm on paper. In practice, it was something more complicated, and the man who ran it, Griffin Mercer, was something more complicated still. Dad. My voice came out very quiet. Faye, how long? He told me. 18 months. He'd been borrowing from Mercer Holdings for 18 months, through a third party he'd met at a poker table in Atlantic City. A man named Sal who had smiled and said the rates were reasonable, and Hugh had believed him, because Hugh always believes the person's smiling at him. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after we hung up. Then I called the only person I knew who had ever done business with Griffin Mercer directly. My boss, Richard, who had once handled a property dispute that touched the edge of Mercer Holdings' portfolio. He was quiet for a long time when I explained the situation. "Faye," he said finally, "walk away from it. He's my father. I know, but Mercer doesn't negotiate. Everyone negotiates." Richard made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He doesn't need to. That's the difference. I called the main office of Mercer Holdings the next morning and asked for Griffin Mercer. I expected to be put on hold indefinitely. I expected a gatekeeper to tell me he wasn't available and take a message that would never be passed along. Instead, after 30 seconds of silence, a woman's voice said, "He'll see you Thursday at 4. I don't know why that made me more nervous than a refusal would have. The Mercer Holdings offices were on the 38th floor of a building in Center City that had the kind of lobby that makes you feel like your shoes are wrong. Everything was glass and pale stone. The elevator moved soundlessly. I wore my best blazer and had gone over every negotiation tactic I could remember from the one business law class I took in college, and none of it felt adequate. His assistant, a composed woman named Patricia. No, wait. Her name was different. She introduced herself as Helen, and she showed me into a conference room and told me to wait. I waited for 11 minutes. I counted. When the door opened, Griffin Mercer walked in the way people walk into rooms they've always owned. He was taller than I'd expected. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that had probably been striking at 20 and had only gotten more interesting with age. He looked at me the way you look at a contract before you sign it, carefully, thoroughly, like he was checking for weaknesses. I stood up, which I immediately second-guessed. "Miss Callister." He didn't extend his hand. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down like we were resuming a conversation that had been interrupted. "You wanted to speak about Hugh Callister's account. My father's debt," I said. "Yes. It's $180,000 principal. With accrued interest as of this week, it's $214,500. I kept my face neutral. I'd known about the interest rationally, but hearing the number out loud was different. "I'd like to discuss a repayment structure," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Your father has been offered 3 repayment structures. He hasn't met any of them. I'm aware. I'm not here on his behalf. I'm here on my own." Something shifted in his expression, very slightly. If I hadn't been watching him as carefully as he was watching me, I would have missed it. "Go on," he said. "I had a plan. I'd stayed up until 1 a.m. building it. I would put up my own salary as collateral, set up a payment arrangement drawn directly from my account, take on the full sum myself, and clear Hugh out of Mercer Holdings' books entirely. It would take me years. It would probably mean no vacations, no new car, no savings for the better part of a decade, but Hugh would be safe." I walked Griffin Mercer through every number. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You make $67,000 a year," he said. "Yes, this plan takes 9.5 years, I'm aware, and you're willing to do that." It wasn't quite a question. I answered it anyway. "He's my father." Griffin Mercer looked at me for a long moment, and I had the disorienting sense that he was seeing something I hadn't shown him. Then he opened the folder in front of him, took out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "Counter-proposal," he said. I looked down. It was a contract. My name was already on it. The terms were simple on the surface. The full debt would be cleared immediately, with no remaining balance or interest. In exchange, I would come to work directly for Griffin Mercer as his personal legal liaison, not at my current firm, directly for him, for a period of 18 months. Standard compensation, full benefits, and a completion bonus at the end of the contract that would, he noted, more than cover what I would have spent under my own plan. I read it twice. "This is a job offer," I said. "It's a contract." "Why?" He folded his hands on the table. "Because I've been looking for someone with your specific skill set for 4 months. Because you walked into this office prepared. Because you didn't flinch when I gave you the interest number." He paused. "And because it solves the problem more efficiently than your plan." I should have asked for time. I should have taken it home, read every line, consulted someone. Richard's voice was in my head. Mercer doesn't negotiate, but he had, and the math was real. I signed it. The first week, I told myself it was just a job. A strange job, yes, working out of a private office suite on the 37th floor, interfacing between Griffin's legal team and the various holding companies under his umbrella, but a job with clear deliverables and reasonable hours. I called him Mr. Mercer. He called me Callister. The second week, I noticed that the work was genuinely interesting. Mercer Holdings was complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not dirty. I'd expected dirty, had braced myself for it, but layered. There were community development funds buried in the portfolio, 3 nonprofit partnerships, a scholarship program at 2 Philadelphia high schools that I only found because I was cross-referencing tax filings, and stumbled across donation that had been made anonymously for 11 consecutive years. When I mentioned it to him, casually, just as a question, he looked at his computer screen like I hadn't spoken for a moment. Then he said, "The Callaway High Scholarship. Yes, anonymous," I said, intentionally. I didn't push, but I thought about it. The third week, Griffin Mercer stopped calling me Callister. He started calling me Faye. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People call you by your first name. It's a normal thing. Then he brought me coffee one morning, not through his assistant, himself, just set a cup on my desk as he passed and said, "You take it with 1 sugar." I noticed, and I thought, how long have you been noticing? The dress arrived on a Friday afternoon in week 6. I brought it to the office Monday morning. I know that wasn't the normal response, I'm aware, but I wasn't going to sit at home wondering, and the contract we'd signed was about directness, and I was going to be direct. I walked into his office with the box under my arm and set it on his desk. He looked at it, then at me. "You sent this," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "I did." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable. Griffin Mercer was never uncomfortable, just considering. "There's a function on Saturday," he said. "A charity gala. The foundation that runs the Callaway Scholarship is being publicly recognized, and I'm expected to attend and bring." He stopped. Started again. "The expectation is that I attend with someone. So you sent me a dress instead of asking. I wasn't sure you'd say yes. You could have asked. I'm asking now." I stood there looking at him, at the box on his desk, at the very carefully neutral expression on his face that I'd spent 6 weeks learning to read. The dress is champagne silk, I said. Yes, you knew my size. I know a lot of things about you, Faye. His voice dropped just slightly on my name. That tends to happen when someone is in your office every day for 6 weeks. I picked up the box. I'll think about it. He nodded once. That was it. I thought about it for the entire elevator ride down to my floor. I thought about it through 2 hours of contract review and a conference call with a real estate attorney in Wilmington. I thought about how he'd remembered one sugar. How he'd stayed late 3 Tuesdays in a row because I was still there, and there was no reason to stay except that I was there. How he looked at me, like I was a document he was still in the middle of reading and had no intention of putting down. I texted Danny, if a man sends you a dress without asking, and then asks you to a gala, what does that mean? She replied in 4 seconds. It means he's been trying to figure out how to ask for a while. The gala was held at the art museum, the one with the steps everyone knows, the ones from the movie, and they'd lit the outside with pale gold light that made the stone look warm. I wore the dress. I'd told myself I was going as a professional courtesy, as someone who worked for Griffin Mercer and was therefore attending a work function, and I'd believed about 40% of that. He was waiting at the top of the steps. He turned when I got out of the car, and I watched his face do something that his face almost never did. It went unguarded. Just for a second. Just long enough. He came down 2 steps to meet me, which was unnecessary given I was perfectly capable of ascending stairs, and he said nothing for a moment. Just looked at me the way he'd looked at me across the conference table on that first Thursday, except this time it wasn't professional assessment. Does it look good? I asked. Because I'm the kind of person who says the thing out loud. He offered me his arm and said quietly, You know exactly how it looks. I took his arm. Inside, he moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but he kept me close, not possessively, or not only that, but like he was paying attention to where I was at all times. He introduced me without any of the awkward scaffolding people use for ambiguous situations. Just my name, just this is Faye, no explanation of who I was to him, which somehow said more than any title would have. I met the director of the Scholarship Foundation, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who shook my hand warmly and said, Griffin's told me you've been helping restructure the endowment documentation. Thank you for that. I looked at her, then at Griffin, who was looking at a painting on the wall like it was suddenly very interesting. After she moved on, I said, You told her about my work. It was relevant. You don't talk about the people who work for you to your foundation contacts. He was still looking at the painting. No, so why me? He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to look at me, and his expression was as direct as I'd ever seen it. Because you're not just someone who works for me, he said. You haven't been for some time. I've been trying to find a way to tell you that without it being complicated by the contract, and I haven't managed it, and standing here it seems like the appropriate moment to stop trying to manage it and just say it. I held his gaze. The contract ends in 12 more months, I said. I know, that's a long time too, I'm aware. Something moved across his face. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything, Faye. I'm telling you where I stand. What you do with that is yours. I looked at him for a long time. 1 sugar, I said. He blinked. It was the most unguarded I had ever seen him, and it was over in half a second. What? You noticed how I take my coffee on day 3, and you brought it yourself on day 14. I turned to face him fully. I noticed you noticing. I just didn't say anything. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Griffin Mercer didn't do anything as uncomplicated as a smile, but something that lived in the same neighborhood. You didn't say anything, he said. I wasn't sure what to say. And now? I thought about Hugh, who was in an outpatient program as of 3 weeks ago, who had called me on a Tuesday just to say he was sorry, and that he loved me and that he was working on it. I thought about the contract on the 37th floor, which was a legal document and also the most honest thing that had ever passed between 2 people, because it had forced us both to be exactly who we were in a room together for 6 weeks, with nowhere to hide. I thought about champagne silk and 1 sugar and the scholarship program he'd been funding anonymously for 11 years. I think, I said slowly, that when the contract ends, I'd like to renegotiate the terms. He was very still. Define renegotiate, he said. Something longer. Something that isn't about the debt at all. I held his gaze. If you're interested. Griffin Mercer, who didn't negotiate, according to everyone who'd ever dealt with him, looked at me like I was everything he'd decided to be careful about and then stopped being careful about anyway. Interested, he said, is a significant understatement. He offered me his arm again, and this time when I took it, neither of us pretended it was anything other than what it was. My father's debt was cleared, the contract was real, the work was real, and what was building between us, quietly, stubbornly, in the space between boardrooms and late evenings and 1 cup of coffee with 1 sugar, that was the most real thing of all.